The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Glory to you. So one of the scribes, they came to Jesus and put this question to him. Which is the first of all the commandments? And Jesus replied, this is the first. Listen, Israel. The Lord our God is the one Lord. You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: you must love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. Then the scribe said to him, well spoken, Master. What you've said is true, that he is one and there's no other. To love with all your heart, with all your understanding and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. This is far more important than any holocaust or sacrifice. Jesus, seeing how wisely he'd spoken, said, you are not far from the kingdom of God. And after that, no one dared to question him anymore. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. I'm not only going to preach on today's Gospel, I'm going to preach on next Sunday and the Sunday after as well. I hope that's not too presumptuous. Because you can't really fully understand what's going on in a Gospel on its own. You've got to look at the context, the broader story. Anyhow, in the Gospel today, what we've got is the two greatest commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your soul and your mind and your strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. Now let's have a close look at what's going on here. There's a tension in this, inherent in this Gospel passage, because these things are put to us as commandments. These are things you must do. These are, well, what it sounds like is these are behaviours that you must incorporate into your life. But if you read it with any kind of deeper thought, it doesn't sound like something you're going to do. It sounds like something you're going to become. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength. That doesn't leave much out, does it? What this is saying is become love and love your neighbour as yourself. Become love. Let the whole of you, every part of yourself, be transformed and caught up into this one thing. And so that we become like God, because that's what we say about God, isn't it? God is love. Are you love? This is, can you see what I'm saying? That there's this tension written into it. It's not like, here I am, and there's these things I'm supposed to be doing, loving the Lord my God with all my heart, soul, mind, and strength, and my neighbour as myself. So here I am, and then there's this. Like, if there's this, then there isn't anything left here. It's just there's no room left for anything else if we obey this commandment. Now, one of the reasons, I think, perhaps the key reason, that in our thinking and our reading of this, we tend to reduce it, even though it's clear if you look at it that it's about the whole of you, absolutely everything, transformation into this. Deification, have you heard that? We don't often talk much about this because it sounds so weird, but the Christian tradition is very insistent that what we're on about here is deification. In other words, becoming God. That's your vocation. To become God. To become God-like. To become what he is. That doesn't leave any room for anything else. It means every part of ourselves. Now, one of the reasons we don't read this gospel this way, one of the reasons we reduce it in our minds to some behaviours, which is kind of what the Jews did, or what the only thing the Old Testament was capable of grasping here was some behaviours. So it becomes a commandment. Do these things. Perhaps the key reason that that's what happens when we read this is we don't yet know the power of God, which is capable of transforming us into the likeness of God. To become so completely godlike that there is nothing left in you but love. Do we yet know a power like that? Do we believe that can actually happen in our lives? Well, it's kind of hard to believe, isn't it? It's a pretty big stretch when we look at ourselves to think, that's my destiny. That's what I'm meant to be. That's what this commandment is saying. It's a pretty big stretch. So we fix this by not thinking about it too much. We do that a lot with Jesus. Have you noticed that? He says a lot of things that are so outrageously challenging that we kind of take a little bit of it out and don't think about it too much, so I won't notice that what I'm doing isn't what Jesus says. Okay, so my point here is there is a power that can transform me and you into the likeness of God himself, that we would become wholly love with nothing left in us. And that's why we need to connect this gospel with what comes after. Because this is Mark's gospel, and in Mark telling this story, this incident where the scribe comes to Jesus and says, what are the greatest commandments? Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. Love your neighbour as yourself. This incident happens in Jerusalem a few days before Jesus' death. Jesus has made it very clear to the disciples just before this, now we're going up to Jerusalem and the Son of Man is going to be handed over to the Jews and he's going to be scourged and mocked and killed and on the third day rise again. So that's the context. That's what's happening here in the background. We're going straight for the cross. Jesus knows, and if the disciples have been listening, they know too, there's only a couple of days left here. The message here, implicit, it's not kind of clear if you just read today's gospel in isolation, but the message is the power, and you're not going to like this, the power to turn you into God is the cross. The gospel passage also tells the same story in a slightly different way. Just after this, not next Sunday's gospel, but the following Sunday, Jesus gives this long passage. Okay, we only get a little bit of it a fortnight from now, but Jesus gives this long section about the apocalypse. You know that? You know he talks about the temple being torn down and the sun being darkened and the earth shaken and and nations rising up in turmoil and men crying out in fear and saying mountains fall on us and earthquakes and great signs in the heavens and what Jesus is and what he says there and what you get Sunday 2 weeks from now is when all this happens, know that Jesus is about to come to you. We hear those passages about the apocalyptic stuff, the falling apart of everything, and we just kind of imagine this is the end of time. Doesn't really apply to me and you, does it? No. This is the story of your soul, that in order to turn you into love, God is going to take you apart. That's how he does it. Ouch. Did somebody say ouch? Yeah. That's the power that gets us from this compromised, mixed up, partly loving, but lots of other stuff, state where we are, to get us from there into the very likeness of Jesus. What is it? It's Jesus at this point in the story, he's going into being taken apart to lead us through that we too would come into the resurrection where we become the likeness of God. So, I'm going to, the rest of the homily, give you a very brief, caricatured, oversimplified version of how this is going to happen. Now, you don't want this homily to go on for 3 hours, do you? All right, so please accept that this is oversimplified, a caricature, all right? Please accept that. I hope, as with all good caricatures, you'll recognise the truth in it, even though there are a million variations on this story. It doesn't happen exactly like this in every case. But this is something of what happens in the soul. First of all, God gives us a glimpse of his beauty, of his glory, of his love. Enough of a glimpse to turn on your soul, to fire your soul. And if we get something, and you've all had that, well, most have had that glimpse, that's why you're here. That's why you've sought to dedicate not just an hour a week, but, hopefully the whole of your life by investing in this community. We've had the glimpse. And if we see with any truth and any clarity the revelation of God's goodness, the revelation of his beauty and his love, what it does for us is we know the only possible, sensible response is love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength. Nothing else makes sense. Now we know that we're not like that yet, but we know that we must be like that. We know that we must be united with this beauty, that we must make it our own, that we must come into this reality and allow it to come into us and make it everything. We know if we've had this glimpse of God's beauty, that that's the only way that human life can make sense, because this beauty, this goodness makes everything else fall away by comparison. Doesn't it? Yes, good, okay. What else was I going to say about that? All right. And the next part is critical, that in response to this beauty, we set ourselves to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength, because we know that that's the only thing that makes sense. That's who I'm going to be. We must make that choice, and many of us have sought to make that choice. Now, if you stand back from that choice, though, and look at it, it's kind of nuts. Because where on earth am I going to find the grace and the power to love like that, to be united with God himself? This is a semi-autobiographical. One possibility is you might be a very arrogant and naive person and think to yourself, yeah, I can do that, which is kind of nuts. If I had any realism about the depravity of my soul, I would have looked at it at the beginning and said, it's not possible. But, as a young 20-something, I still thought, the world was at my feet and I could do anything I set my mind to. So I thought, well, that's what my life's about. That's where we're going, yes. Or it may be that with this vision of God's beauty and goodness and knowing that this kind of total loving and union with him is the only thing that makes sense, you set yourself to do it, even though you don't know how you're going to do it, just because nothing else makes sense. Got a few nods out there. That's what it's like, isn't it? I don't know how this is going to work, but I know that nothing else can possibly work. So this is where we're going to go. Or maybe you've heard the testimony of the church and the testimony of the saints that says, yes, it is possible. And so you don't know how it's possible yet to be transformed into this union. But the saints say it's possible. You look at the saints, you think, well, it must be possible. Okay, let's go, let's do it. So we set out, we've got the glimpse of God's beauty. We've set ourselves to pursue that and be united with that as the one thing, the one thing. You know, all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, all your strength, nothing else left. The one thing that we're going to pursue, that's what we've set ourselves to do. And we spend many years pursuing that. And growing in that. And the Lord giving us tastes and glimpses to say, yes, come on, you're on the right track here. Let's keep going. Keep going. Yeah, I'll just give you another little taste just to keep you going. You're getting there. And then after many years, actually, many years of determination, there's a Ken Barkerism, I can't remember where he got it from, but, sorry, Teresa of Avila. I heard Ken quote it just very recently anyway. After many years of determination that that's where I'm going, the Lord says, right, you're ready. And he takes you apart. He dismantles you. It might be bereavement. It might be serious illness or injury. It might be midlife crisis. It might be, I don't know. I know there were 4 things. I kind of spoil the flow a bit here, but where is it? I know it's here somewhere. Oh, humiliation or failure. That's a good one. Didn't want to leave that out. Or it might be a combination of all of those things, or a whole lot more. That's kind of autobiographical as well. The Lord takes us apart, and why he's doing that is he's saying, you are ready now. Love has taken root in your soul sufficiently that you're ready to stay that course as I dismantle all the things in you that are not love, so that only love is left, so that you become pure and single, like God himself. So there's nothing left in you in love but love. After we take apart everything else. And if we have spent our years and years and years of determinedly seeking God above all, then even when everything starts to fall apart, we stay the course. We say, well, there's nowhere else I can go now. I've just spent the last 20, 30 years dedicating myself to this. I'm not going to suddenly change course just because it's all turned to crap. Or maybe also, maybe in the soul, and actually this is the truth, this is what actually happens, deep in the soul, beyond the level of our consciousness, even though everything that we're aware of, it's all falling apart and crumbling, and we are humiliated and we're failing and we're in grief and we're depressed and we're sick and we're whatever else is going on, somewhere, somehow, the psyche has the ability subconsciously to be aware that God is really close now. He's coming. You can't see it. You can't put your finger on it, but somehow you know. Even though everything's falling apart, this is where the real thing is happening. Now, to cut a very long story short, what happens then, when everything else has been stripped away and we have been made love so that only love for God, through God for all others, only love is left, then God over many years again starts to rebuild the soul from that point. And that rebuilding actually, the first version of this homily was just going to say, leave it at that the Lord then, after the destruction, after the falling apart, the Lord rebuilds the soul from that foundation to make us entirely love. But actually what happens over many years is there's a lot more falling apart. There's a lot more taking apart. There's a lot more suffering, if I may use that word. But what is happening in the soul now is that the suffering doesn't hurt like it used to, because I now recognise that this is the means by which God is drawing me into himself. So yeah, he's taking me apart. Yeah, I'm facing further humiliation, further sickness, further grief, further destruction of one kind or another, further failure. Yes, I'm facing all those things, but in each of those things, I'm finding that God is the more present to me, and my soul is becoming more into his likeness through the stripping away of all the things that are not him. So that's the story of our souls, people. That's the call, the vocation, and there's two things that I want you to take from this, that I hope and pray that you'll take from this. The first thing you'll actually hear in next Sunday's Gospel, and the second thing you'll hear in Sunday a fortnight from now. The first thing is just that we need to renew in ourselves that giving absolutely everything for the Lord. That's the foundation. If we don't do that, and if we don't stay that course, we are not ready, and we cannot endure the taking apart that the Lord wants to do in us in order to transform us. Only if we determinedly stay that course. Lord, it is you that I want, it's only you that I want. And if I want anything else, it's only in you and because of you and through you and because it's your gift to me. If we don't stay there, then we cannot be transformed into Christ. And that's repeated again in next Sunday's Gospel when we have the parable. Jesus talks about the widow who puts 2 coins into the treasury, right? He congratulates her. She put everything in. That's the story. That's got to be our story. We've got to put everything in. But the second one is then in the following Sunday's Gospel, where we'll get this apocalyptic falling apart. Now, I want you to notice that 2 weeks from now, the apocalyptic falling apart is not just an apocalyptic falling apart, it's also a coming of the Lord to our souls. In those days, after the time of distress, the sun darkened, the moon loses the brightness, the stars come falling from heaven, the powers of the heaven will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Then too he will send his angels to gather you from the 4 winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. That's when it happens. When you see all the falling apart, he says, take the message of the fig tree when it loses its leaves. Hold on, I've got it the wrong way around. When the twigs grow supple and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Jesus is saying, read the signs, folks. When you're falling apart, the Lord is coming.